Well, in reaction to Trump's border policy, the Kremlin says it saw nothing new in U.S. President's latest remarks on the Ukraine conflict, adding that Moscow was ready for mutually respectful dialogue with Washington. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin claims that last year was quite successful for the Russian economy during a meeting with members of his government.
In general, and we have already talked about this, last year was quite successful for the Russian economy. Key macro indicators, thanks to responsible, calculated and joint actions of the state and the business community, are in the positive zone. But first, I would like to say a few words about the state of the federal budget. Its deficit was estimated to be 1.7% of GDP last year. This is an acceptable level, especially given the state of affairs in public finances in some so-called developed economies. Last year, budget revenues not related to the sale of oil and gas increased. They grew by 26% and amounted to 25.6 trillion rubles, ed. Note, around $259 billion. This is almost 800 billion rubles, ed. Note, around $8 billion, more than the government expected in the fall. This means that a reliable revenue base is being formed for the National Wealth Fund, ed. Note, Russia's sovereign wealth fund, already this year, which makes it much less dependent on external conditions in the commodity markets. In turn, additional oil and gas budget revenues last year amounted to 1.3 trillion rubles, ed. Note, around $13 billion. This will allow maintaining the volume of the National Wealth Fund, ed. Note, Russia's sovereign wealth fund, even though part of its funds were allocated to government spending and large-scale, systemically important investment projects. In this way, we preserve the potential and capabilities of the National Wealth Fund as an important stabilizing mechanism and, at the same time, a development tool. Since October 1st last year, the military pensions, for Russian servicemen or their family members, for long service, disabilities or loss of a breadwinner have been indexed. The increase was 5.1%. I think it is correct and fair to make an additional indexation for military pensioners, taking into account the actual rise in prices last year.
Well, and for more on this development, international affairs analyst Dr. Marek Laskiewicz joins us from London. Marek, glad to have you join us here. Let's just start with an overview. What stood out for you during Trump's address of Davos?
The key point that he came across is that he is going to impose tariffs, and the date, of course, is the beginning of February. This is actually in line, as are so many of his policies, with previous American policies. If you go back the last 100, 200 years, America used to have very, very high tariffs, and it's only after World War II, notably by J.F. Kennedy, that they were reduced. His policy is therefore in keeping with past American approaches, and it's almost certain to go ahead. This is the key point, because simultaneous with that, those high American tariffs, world trade was actually far less. Therefore, the implication is quite clear. If he goes ahead with these tariffs, there will be some sort of slowdown in world trade, which would be a pity.
And then it didn't seem to include the fact that the rest of the world, whether it's Mexico, whether it's Canada, who is saying 25%, or China, 10%, will also retaliate. They've been, of course, talking up that.
Yes, this is actually what happened before. They were essentially beggar my neighbor policies. One country puts up its tariffs, another country puts its tariffs in retaliation. And what actually is happening is world trade is slowing down, as I stated. And therefore, this is actually the key effect that will come about. It is hard to see that many countries will necessarily invest in USA. And in any case, some things are uninvestable. And so the net effect will be that world trade will be lower than it could be. Unquestionably, though, he will be popular for this in the States, because if, for example, there's a huge trade deficit with the that's the European Union, then at that point, clearly, many Americans would feel his policies are correct. And so therefore, although there might be a slowdown in world trade, it is likely not to impinge negatively on his popularity because he's seen to be doing something for America.
All right. Well, so much to talk about that, but then because there's the question of who would pay these taxes, wouldn't it reflect on the pockets or spending of Americans? But let's talk about Ukraine, Russia. He says he will increase sanctions in Russia if Putin doesn't settle. What does the word settle there mean? And Putin, on the other hand, is saying, well, I'm ready to discuss with Trump. No problem about that. But I wouldn't make the first move. Trump has to make the first move, and it has to be on my terms.
Yes, well, this was a familiar almost trade of negotiating points, is it not? Putin is laying out his side, which is well known. He actually still, I think, is trying for the whole of Ukraine. And also, he's made it quite clear he's not going to be pushed into any settlement which he feels does not give him a clear-cut victory. That much is clear. Zelensky, for his part, has said he's not prepared to give up an inch of Ukrainian territory. And so from the word go, there are totally incompatible negotiating positions. What Trump has done is actually, in its way, much weaker than one would have suspected. What he has said is going to increase sanctions. And incidentally, although he didn't say this, now he has previously implied that he might reduce the price of oil in the world, which would dent Russian income. However, this right from the word go, on the 22nd of February, the war broke out, I pointed out sanctions will be next to useless. And unfortunately, they are. The Russian economy is not doing all that badly. Moreover, what is missing in his speech was anything about supplying Ukraine with arms, which from the word go, I thought should have been done all the way back when the war broke out. And he has made no clear vision of what is this settlement. As you rightly pointed out, he says settle, but didn't say settle on what. So therefore, the speech actually, as the first one, or rather his points, are somewhat weaker than one would have hoped. And it's very hard to see, on the basis of this threat that he's made, that Russia is going to do anything at all. And therefore, it is unlikely he can finish the war in 100 days, let alone in one day, if he's going to not put more muscle into what he's saying.
Well, some experts are saying this as braggadocio because Trump has not laid out any plan whatsoever about to end this war. At the same time that Putin is making his own thoughts known, Zelensky is saying, I am not going or willing to give up any of the lands of Ukraine. At the time that Rubio said, Ukraine, Zelensky has to be ready to let go some of his territory.
Quite so. They're totally incompatible, all these points. And therefore, the only point can be said like this. Zelensky is unwilling to budge, so the war from his point of view will go on as long as he's not forced to do otherwise. Putin has made it quite clear he's prepared to fight, and he feels he is winning. Incidentally, they are approaching towards Pokrovsk, and therefore, from that point of view, he's not willing to compromise. But Trump, unless he puts some muscle behind what he wants, and it makes clear what he wants, because that also, as you've pointed out, is not being stated, it's quite clear it's going to get nowhere in this. And therefore, all we're really saying is, so far, he has done nothing, has not moved one iota forwards to bringing about an end to this war.
Before we let you go, let's discuss a little bit on Gaza. Israel is still attacking the West Bank. What do you make of this at a time there's supposed to be peace for 42 days before we get into the second phase?
Well, it all unfortunately seems to confirm that the second phase is unlikely to realize anything at all. From all the statements made from the Israeli side, they're quite clear to return to fighting. They're quite clear they want to eliminate Hamas entirely. And this West Bank operations that they're carrying out simply reinforces with actions what they're saying with words. On the other side, Hamas has made it quite clear it is in charge of the Gaza Strip. It is going nowhere in that sense. And therefore, there is again an incompatibility of goals, which means that any negotiations will be very hard. There already are minor disagreements, please note, about the route from Egypt to the Gaza Strip, because there's an Israeli military presence there, which is irking the Egyptians. And so, together with the West Bank actions, although I anticipate that the peace will hold for some time still, it is quite clear that phase two, as we look at it, is probably a dead duck.
What do you make of this before you just a quick one? Chicago Police Department is saying we will not cooperate or assist Trump. The mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, doubled down on his vow to oppose Trump's sweeping reform.
Well, there's been quite a few of these private actions taking Trump or the federals. They want to take them to court. They want to stop any sort of deportations. Because America is a democracy, indeed, without grassroots support like that from the various mayors, it will be harder to carry out. And therefore, this is going to mean that his vision of a one sweep to clear all America of all illegal migrants is unlikely. Indeed, I would go so far as to say impossible to realize. The question is whether how much of his vision will be realizable. And here comes the second nasty point. If he cannot bring about the changes he wants with migrants, his, how can I put it, prestige for ending wars in Gaza and Ukraine will fall. And it's largely his tariff policy, which is something he can do, which will be the mainstay of his immediate progress as a president.
Thank you so much. We will leave it there. Marek Laskiewicz, for your always interesting submissions on the world. Thank you.